There is absolutely no greater feeling as a lifelong sports fan, dating back to when I was a boy, teenager, young adult, and so on, to root for a team that you love, no matter what sport. To put all that time, energy, investment into a team where it just creeps into your soul and sticks there. And with all that emotional attachment that you have to the team and having to suffer with many losses and very few wins. But again, when you get to that mountaintop of whatever sport that you follow and knowing that your team throughout that journey, throughout that year or that postseason made it to where the confetti falls down and you exalt in relief, in joy, in euphoria. Oh man, that's the whole reason of being a sports fan. It does not get any better than that. But like I said, and unfortunately, it's a scenario where we suffer more losses than we do wins. And considering the NFL playoffs are on the way, and it is January, so right now teams who are trying to get themselves in a spot where they could go through a conference and represent that conference in a Super Bowl and hope that whatever city and that fan base will have that same feeling that I had when I rooted for my team. Let's say Super Bowl 40 and 43 in particular, when the Steelers won those two Super Bowls, or even dating back to when I was a boy in Super Bowls 13 and 14. 9 and 10 were just a little bit too young for me, but you get the picture. But one more time, it's the losses. Because yes, we could talk about the wins, we could talk about how great the runs were, especially that 2005 one, which you got to check out on the channel here as I chronicle that, the 20th anniversary of that Super Bowl 40 run. But I digress, I know, shameless plug. But in all seriousness, the losses, man, they never, ever, ever leave your soul. And I have one in particular. And unfortunately, this is the anniversary, this day, January 15th, 1995, that I have to bring up. Because every time this day comes around, I think about it. I remember where I was, who I was with, and how it all transpired. And this is what I have to share with you, especially the Steeler fans out there, and you know, as to why this was the worst loss that I've ever experienced as a Pittsburgh Steelers fan. And people can say, whoa, JAYREELZ, time out. You mean to tell me that losing Super Bowl 30 to the Cowboys there in Arizona wasn't worse? Because that was a championship. That was for a Super Bowl. Or even Super Bowl 45, where Aaron Rodgers, the current Steeler quarterback now, beat us down in Dallas, therefore shot to win 3 Super Bowls in 6 years. Yeah, that was also tough too. But you know what? The Cowboys were heavily favored against us, and at least we were in the game in the fourth quarter until Neil O'Donnell. Do I even need to bring that up? Or even in the Super Bowl, where we trailed throughout, and it was an uphill battle the whole way. And even though we cut it to 28-25 and he tacked on a field goal, and we actually had the ball there in the final 2 minutes to see what we could do, and after a first down, we weren't able to convert another. And therefore, the Packers were able to celebrate a Super Bowl that they hadn't had since the Brett Favre days in the mid-90s. But now, let's get to the loss, because this one sticks to the ribs, and for great reason. And when I think back to that time, 1994, well, that season, but the 95, considering it all transpired in January of that year. When I look back after the Steelers beat the Cleveland Browns quite handily in a divisional round, and then the next day, Miami was playing San Diego out in California, and I thought to myself, well, I'd rather play the Chargers, only because I didn't want the narrative to be Dan Marino winning in San Diego and then going to Pittsburgh, where we all know that's where he's from, that's where he played his collegiate ball, to go back to Pittsburgh, and then in the cards or somewhere in the galaxy where the football gods will probably shine on number 13 in aqua and orange, to where Dan Marino would get back to a Super Bowl. Because as we all know, he went to 1 Super Bowl in his second year and never went back. But as I watched that game that Sunday between Miami and San Diego, and knowing that the Dolphins had a shot to go to Pittsburgh on the leg of Pete Stoyanovich, their kicker, and when he lined up for a kick late in the game, and as he went ahead, swung his right leg and missed it, I believe it was wide right. Wide left, doesn't matter. He missed the kick anyway. The first thing that came out of my mouth as I sat in my grandmother's old apartment on the sofa, I threw my arms up in the air and I said to myself at that time, we're going to the Super Bowl. The Steelers are going to go. Why did I say that? Easy. San Diego, a warm weather team, was not going to travel to Pittsburgh, where I was hoping it'd be 30 below zero. And therefore, the Steelers will have pretty much a cakewalk to get to a Super Bowl. And this is what happens when you're young, dumb, and full of, you know what I mean. But yes, I'm thinking that they're going to go. only because the Steelers had a very good year, 1 seed. They were dominating the game against the Browns, played well. They beat them 29-9, actually beat them 3 times that year in order for them to get to a championship game. And how I looked at it was that, yeah, this is a shoo-in, foregone conclusion, etc. It was even so bad, if you recall, that the Steelers were going to produce a Super Bowl rap video, similar to the Bears Super Bowl Shuffle back in the 85 season when they literally stampeded everybody on their way to winning Super Bowl 20 and obviously squashing the Patriots along the way. But as premature as that was, and getting back to San Diego with guys like Natron Means and their defense, the Darian Gordons of the world, the Leslie O'Neals, of course, they took notice of that and said, wait a minute, what? They're already trying to produce a Super Bowl video? And I don't even think it ever came out, quite frankly. But anyway, as you get ready for the game the following week, the first of that doubleheader, remember Dallas played San Francisco in the 4 o'clock window. And here it was, San Diego, Pittsburgh. I was anticipating it. A trip to get to the Super Bowl, considering that the Steelers had not been in the Super Bowl since the 1979 season. And I remember that as a 10-year-old watching that game in my living room where Terry Bradshaw threw those 2 bombs to John Stallworth, one for a touchdown and one that led to another touchdown down 19-17 in the 4th quarter. And I'm thinking, wait a minute, this is the closest I'm going to get. And I could feel it. I could taste it because the Chargers, it's going to be too cold in Pittsburgh for them to go in there and beat the Steelers in their game to try to pound the rock, play that Blitzburg defense of that time, and just go on to win and hopefully get themselves down to Miami where they were going to face off against either Dallas or San Francisco and Super Bowl 29. But something happened along the way. The football gods and Mother Nature were on 2 different pages because Mother Nature said, oh no, it's not going to snow. It's not even going to be cold. All right, there'll be some elements. It'll be cloudy. It'll be dark. It'll be misty. It'll be rainy. But the temperature was a balmy 55 degrees. And the Steelers, as an 8.5-point favorite, you thought to yourself, all right, well, it's going to be warm. That still shouldn't be a factor because they're playing in our building, that old bowl of a stadium, 3 Rivers, similarly built to Busch Stadium in St. Louis, or the Vet in Philadelphia, same for Riverfront Stadium in Cincinnati. And how I looked at it was we had a great home field advantage. There's no way that San Diego's going to come into our building and just bum rush us to get themselves to a Super Bowl. And think about it. From the start of the game, as the Steelers were marching down the field, and I'm sure the Chargers thought that the Steelers were going to be run heavy. But Neil O'Donnell was chucking the ball downfield. Whether it be to Ernie Mills or Andre Hastings, Eric Green, didn't matter. And that touchdown, which got them on the board on that opening drive, was to John L. Williams, their fullback. 7-0. The building is going crazy. Welcome to the blast furnace. That's what they called 3 River Stadium at that time. And you would think that there's no way that the Steelers are going to lose that game. But the Chargers hung around. They did. And unfortunately for the Steelers, they weren't able to get that next score to extend their lead. And as it was 7-3 as they were marching down the field and they were getting inside the red zone where it looked like if they would have scored a touchdown, who knows how the rest of this game would have turned out. Instead, they kicked the field goal right before the half, which was good because they did get points. But you kind of wonder whether or not that they left a touchdown on the field. Therefore, they had to settle for 3 points. Something that was going to come back to haunt us later on in the game. So the Chargers get the ball to start off the second half. And starting to march down the field, making some plays. But then under a mild rush, Stan Humphries throws an out. But right in front of it was Rod Woodson. Oh, how much I love Rod Woodson, number 26. And as he intercepted the ball, he couldn't break free, which was huge because if he would have broken free and maybe would have gotten a few extra yards or maybe could have taken it to the house, who knows, again, how that game would have turned out. But as it was, as the Steelers were trying to march down the field, get into the red zone, try to get into the end zone, they fell short yet again and had to settle for a field goal. So now, with about 11 minutes to go in the 3rd quarter, a 10-3 lead was 13-3. And you just had a feeling, an eerie feeling, that the Steelers could have done more and left more points there for them to be tacked on to extend the lead. It didn't happen. And that's what happens when you keep teams in the game that always feel like they have an opportunity or they have a shot. And sure enough, the one play that turned it around was the Steelers biting on that play fake. It was a play action to where Alfred Papunu, remember him, caught it wide open. You or I could have caught that ball and was able to get into the end zone to cut the score to 13-10. I remember him taking the football, cracking it open, and drinking it as if it was a tall boy. And now it's 13-10. Steelers are pressing a little bit, not converting. Situation where, not that it's looking bleak because they still have the lead, but they're not applying any pressure. They're letting the Chargers in the game. And then as we get into the fourth quarter, we know what happened. The big play there, Stan Humphries throwing that bomb. Tim McKyer, what happened? Tony Martin under it. And mind you, earlier in the game, you had the same play where Humphries threw a bomb to Sean Jefferson. And there was a pass interference that was called, which led to the 3 points that the Chargers put on the board at that time. But you would think that was a similar play in that similar direction toward that end zone where why didn't the defensive coordinator, why didn't Bill Cowher even think about that? And he puts Tim McKyer, who I understand was a good veteran, played on those Super Bowl teams in the Niners earlier in that 90s decade. But still, where was Deion Figures? Rod Woodson, I'm sure Rod was somewhere else on the field, but McKyer, of all people. So now it's 17-13. They tag on the extra point, and now it's a situation where the Steelers have to deliver. They have to come through. Again, 8.5-point favorites at home. All right, Mother Nature didn't cooperate, but still, there's no way we should lose to this team in our building, knowing that we're this close from going to a Super Bowl. And here was Neil O'Donnell, chugging it down the field, marching it down, moving the chains. It looked very promising to think that they got past midfield. Now they're in field goal range. But of course, the field goal isn't going to help because they're down by 4. That's 8. 4. So now you have a situation where they're inching closer. Now they're inside the 10. Of course, I'm at a bar. Crazy as this is going to sound, but my cousin Josh, who I love dearly, and I haven't seen you in a long time, my man, and I believe also my cousin JD was there. They're both brothers, of course. We went to a strip joint. We used to watch all our games at the strip joint at Hunts Point in the Bronx for those who live in the New York area. And obviously it's a famed place. I don't even know if it's still even there at this point. But we used to go to this bar to watch the games because not only did they have DirecTV and the Sunday Ticket, I understand it was on free TV, you could have watched it at home, but that was just a hub to watch all our games that we just decided that we're not going to break superstition. We're going to go there considering we were there all year and were there the year before, back in 93, that we can't break free from this. This is tradition. We got to stick by it. Tried and true, we got to make sure that if we're going to go to the Super Bowl, we're going to go to the place where we watch all the Steelers games throughout the entire year. And as it was, with all of the dancers behind us, here I am with my cousin, who was also a huge Steelers fan, yelling and screaming at the top of our lungs, just trying to will our team not only into the end zone, but hopefully to Miami for a Super Bowl. And then came the calls. A lot of passing calls. I believe they ran on first down, if I'm not mistaken. But then you had to wonder, it's not as if they had a big-time wide receiver on the team. No, they didn't have a Jerry Rice. No, they didn't have a Michael Irvin or Sterling Sharp. They had very good, serviceable guys. Ernie Mills, Andre Hastings. They did have a big target and a very good tight end in Eric Green. But mind you, they're inside the 5 at this point. And now it's 4th and goal at the 3-yard line. What do? What's going to happen? How's this going to unfold? Neil O'Donnell drops back. He sees Barry Foster, their running back, who is right there in front of him. But Foster, as he was sliding backwards and as O'Donnell let go of the ball, in comes the linebacker, Dennis Gibson, to swat it away. And mind you, just a few plays earlier, Gibson almost had an interception on a similar play there, just about 3 or 4 plays prior to that. So they went back to the well yet again, similar to how the Chargers did, and converted the second time around to get the go-ahead touchdown, but the Steelers were unable to get their own go-ahead touchdown. And therefore, the ball was swatted away. The Chargers are up in arms in celebration. And to this day, I know people who are in that building. And they told me that, forget about hearing a pin drop. The only thing you heard in that stadium, no matter where you sat, whether it was right behind the dugouts there at the old Three River Stadium or all the way up in the 400s, where my cousin JD and Josh, the aforementioned, we sat at the very beginning of that year, September 4th, 1994, JD, being the big Cowboy fan that he was and my former radio partner as well, we went to Three Rivers on that opening day there, Labor Day weekend. And here it was. We were there that very first game, and now we're watching the very last game here on a TV in a strip bar in the Bronx. And all those people that had told me who were there said that you could have heard that celebration probably in the parking lot, let alone in the upper tank or right there in the first row on the 50-yard line. That was such a painful loss. Excruciating. that even when I think about it, if they played that game 10 times, the Steelers probably win 8 times. That's how good they were, and they were dominating the game. And they fell not 1, not 2, but 3 yards short. Which was the motto heading into next year, because they knew that they were 3 yards short. And if you watch Steelers games at that time, they had the banner in the end zone, 3 more yards. And next year had their own run, where they were 3-4, they won 8 in a row. They had that crazy game at Lambeau to end the year, where they lost, where Yancey Thigpen, remember when he dropped the ball? He had a touchdown in his hands, and he dropped it. And then they beat the Bills in the divisional round. They end up beating in a very underrated AFC Championship game against the Colts before losing to the Cowboys, as I mentioned earlier in this video. But it's not about that. It's about what happened in the 94 season, the AFC Championship game, again, 31 years ago today. And I understand the Steelers have won Super Bowls after that, and people can say, JAYREELZ, you gotta let that go. Come on, that was 100 years ago, nobody cares, so on and so forth. But guess what? When you're a kook, like I am when it comes to my teams and sports, again, the losses stick with you longer than the victories. And yes, of course, you are going to remember the victories. And by any means, I'm not trying to needle the Yankee fan here. But if I were to bring up the 2004 ALCS, how do you think they're going to feel about that? Yes, that's going to stick with them forever. And even though they won in 2009 and they could say that, oh, we won 4 World Series in 5 years from 96 to 2001 and they came this close from winning 5 of 6. But if you bring up the 2004 season, oh, that's going to bring back bad memories. That's my point. Case closed. So that's why I had to get this off my chest. And maybe, who knows, by doing so, it's cathartic. It's just letting go of that game, of that period, of a season, which was so promising, which I thought the Steelers would have gone to the Super Bowl and they would have put up a better fight than the Chargers did, because you know how the Chargers fared in that Super Bowl. Please, I remember the touchdown pass, Jerry Rice, what was it, second, third play of the game? That was it. They put up 49 points on the San Diego Chargers. That wouldn't have happened to the Steelers. But obviously we'll never know. But one thing I do know is that loss, to this day, still sticks with me. But maybe, just maybe, by putting out this video, I can release it into the universe or into the ether. Because, Lord forbid, 31 years later, I'm still talking about this. Maybe it is time to let it go.